Alright, step one is, whoops, to remove the top hat assembly by removing that nut right there. That's the 22mm socket. Impact away. There's a bunch of parts to this. Make sure you keep all these guys in order. There you go. And then you want to make sure there's no dust on that spherical bearing, unlike mine. Slide the spring off. Set that aside. Now I want to get the lower strut mount off. We don't need to worry about these rings. They're not in the way. It's going to be like that, huh? I didn't do this for the last one, but a strap wrench might be helpful to get the threaded body outside of the lower strut mount. I suppose you could also use a pipe wrench on this. Well, it's really stuck, so I guess we get to see the pipe wrench method. So we're going to pick a section of the threaded body that I'm just not going to use. The top thread's up here, and the smooth collar. And just thread it on there. Please come on. Holy shit, dude. There you go. So the next step is to remove the inverted assembly from the threaded body here. And what I would recommend doing first is setting your damper all the way to 0, especially if you're like me and have it set to max normally. The reason for this is because when we start to compress the rod that you can't see yet, you don't want to be fighting the damper and the fluid that's in there, just the oil. So set this to 0, make it flow better, make it easier, and then we got to take the damper off. These can get stuck sometimes. Mine just came right off, but if they do get stuck, then you need a 21mm socket will fit right over it. It's got some edges to catch it there, and then you'll have to use a 17mm potentially to grab the nut underneath it. It'll just barely sit there, and you can hit it with an impact or a wrench to cut it loose. And then just unscrew that, pull it out, and then that's the 17. This is what we need that pass-through 17 for. So you can fit, it's a pass-through, trust me. So you can fit that on there and keep the rod, this is the end of the rod, from moving while you take it off. You could try and just blast this guy off with an impact, but I already tried it, it's not going to work for me. So pass-through on there. For me, this 22 is just the wrench that goes with the pass-through because I got impact sets, really nice. So get it on there, and then and now pull the strut assembly out. There we go. And that's that. Now next, I already did this, I already pulled the bump stop out. The bump stop will usually be caught up in here if it's not sitting on the rod somewhere. And you want to inspect that to make sure it doesn't look something like this in a whole bunch of pieces. So now you can see there's these 4 holes here that have been broken in the warranty void seal. This is supposed to be able to come off so you can clean the bottom in there. I don't know how well you can see, but it's fairly dirty on the inside. On my other one, this didn't budge one bit even with the impact, but the larger adapter does fit right on there. You're welcome to try, but I basically just put a bunch of carb cleaner in there because it leaves no residue, and spray it out. You can use water in a brush, something, just get the inside of this clean. You especially want to make sure you focus on the inside of that seal right there to give you an idea of what the clean one should look like. You can see just how much more you can see in there. Just get all the dirt out. Make sure this rubber seal is in good shape right here. Make sure this spring around the edge is in good shape. Let's see what we can see down in there. Work with me, light. There we go. Nice and reflecty all the way down. No dirt. There's these two mud catch seals, I guess you can say, in here. Make sure you get all the dirt out from between the two of them, otherwise they can't do their job too well. Now we got to let all the nitrogen out of this thing. I haven't said anything about a vise, but I'm really not sure how you can do this without having a bench vise of some kind. Very, very nifty. So, because this is inverted, this is normally on the top, but the nitrogen comes out of that little hole right there. So we need our 2mm, 2.5mm Allen key to take out the first plug. Don't lose this, even though you get replacements, but I like to keep them. And then there's a little rubber plug in there. Who am I kidding? You're not going to see it. You just got to fish that thing out with a pick. So this is where I think having multiple picks is nice. This long straight pick was the one that worked easiest for me. Ooh, you hear that? Feel free to mangle the hell out of this plug, because you get a new one in the rebuild kit. And definitely wear eye protection for this, because if you push this thing too hard while you're trying to plug it out or pull it out, you could push down enough to let some nitrogen shoot out. On my last one I had some fluid caught in there, and it would have got into my eye if I didn't have eye protection on. So this thing's kind of just tumbling its way out right now. I'm kind of mangling it and destroying it. It's okay. Just be mindful of the threads that the plug that we just took out seats in. You don't want to damage those. There we go. I mangled it. Not even worth seeing, really. So now there's the valve holding nitrogen in there is basically a little ball valve, check valve style, rubber ball, and it's right in the bottom here. I'm pretty sure this doesn't come off. There's no gap, nothing to take it off. So you got to use something to get in there and push down that ball to let all the nitrogen out. I found a 2mm, 2.5mm Allen key, works pretty well. I'll just pop this so you can hear it. It takes a lot of pressure to get this one to compress. Sometimes too much. So what I ended up doing, setting this like so, and push down on the strut body while holding this down, and you should be able to hear it. Maybe we'll get some fluid to shoot out. There it goes. Hear that? There we go. And then stop when you bottom out. We're going to want to measure this. Now we're going to take this top seal off. Use a pick, clean out those little holes there so you can seat the adapter on it. So this is, of the two that look like this, it's the smaller one. If this doesn't compress all the way, you still got nitrogen left in there. If it's starting to come up on its own at all, you still got nitrogen in there. This really is kind of a pain in the ass to compress, and I did hurt my hand compressing it hard at the first time. But definitely don't try and open this thing up when there's still nitrogen left in there. This part won't be a problem, but you will not be able to get that C-clip off if you do. I'm just doing that to pop it loose. Don't worry about damaging this guy. You'll replace it. Same thing with pretty much everything in here. It'll get replaced if you damage it, so don't worry about that. Alright, so now this is going to look a lot like the upright GZ at this point, just everything's a little bit smaller. You can see what we got to do next, which is get that C-clip out. Here's the edge of it right here, and there's the other edge of it. So this C-clip here holds this guy in, which holds the seal in. So now let's get that out. So what we're going to do is take that punch or a screwdriver and just go around the edge here and this part and tap this thing down. We're only trying to tap it down like a millimeter. It won't hurt anything if you go farther. But we're just trying to take some pressure off that C-clip so we can pry it out more easily. But before we do that, what we're going to want to do is, since we've bottomed this guy out, we want to take time to measure from the top of the lip here to pick somewhere on here you want to measure. When we reset this rod down to the bottom, there's not a spacer to put in here to set the rod height. So we're going to use the rod to push the floating piston down in there. And we want to stop it at this height here. So we have enough space in there to have a bump stop and for the nitrogen to go in the, well, the bump stop's going to be up here, for the nitrogen to go in the bottom there. So let's do that. That. Top of the rod to the top of the sleeve. We'll go with that. So now we want to get at that C-clip, and this might pop right out, or I might need a second set or a second pick to get it to stay out. I don't know. I'm just bad at this. Raceworks said that they just pop this thing right out, and I've always had to fight it. There you are. Come on out. This might fly away if... There we go. Don't lose this. Thread this guy on upside down. We're going to make a handle out of this. And basically just going to pull this up. Oh, there we go. So I just pulled this up. The stage came up. You can probably see it. There we go. So I kind of damaged the threads like I was saying not to do, but you don't need this thing to be replaceable. Or sorry, it is replaceable, so you don't need to reuse it, so you don't have to care. So now I'm just opening these vice grips up. I'm not going to actually clamp them down. I'm kind of using them as like a two-sided pry just to get in there. Oh wow, I can do that by hand. So normally I push these in here, get them in the gap, and then just pry up and have the whole thing pop out. But I think this is coming out by hand. Just twisting. Nope, we're gonna pry it. Like so. Whew, no mess. All right. And there's your upper seal. There's going to be about 350, 400 mils of fluid in here. Get a big enough container and pour it out. Not all the fluid is going to come out when you do it this way. There's still some stuck around the valving. So, once you get to this point, mess is likely here. Wiggle the body back and forth, and we're trying to move the valving up. Sometimes it just gets like, not stuck, but kind of stuck. You can see there's still some fluid coming out there and dripping off my hand. There's the valving. Alright. Wiggle back and forth. There we go. There's your valve. Look how much fluid came out from there. Okay. Now, I am going to be not only replacing things, but I'm going to be changing the fluid viscosity of this oil. It came to 7.5 weight. I'm going to be going up to 30 weight to get a little more damping out of this. So because of that, we want to wash this thing out. Not wash it out, but just wipe it off really good, get as much of the old oil out as we can. So that's what I'm going to do now. Set this guy down there. I'm going to come back to you. I'm just going to wipe this off with a towel and set it somewhere where it's not going to get dusty. But just while we're here, while we're looking at this, here's your valve. Here we go. So these on the bottom here, you can see your shim stack right there. This is, if you think about how this thing behaves, when you go over a bump, it goes up. So all of the fluid has to go down this way relative to the piston, or to the rod. So it's going through this valve. See those little cavities in there, little spaces around the edge of the valving, around the shims. And the thickness of those shims and the stack of them is going to slow down that fluid a little bit. So one way to tune these things is to mess with the shims. Add more shims, make the shims thicker, take shims away, that kind of thing. Raceworks does not provide these shims individually, so I didn't want to mess with that. And it also probably requires some shock tuning or dyno tuning. So as opposed to messing with one side, because you know that's just one side of the shim stack for compression. I don't know how you can see it. The rebound shims are on top, right there. So I'm not going to mess with those. I'm just going to make the oil a little bit more viscous and increase the nitrogen pressure. Wash this off. Alright, now we have the floating piston is down in here, right about there. There's the floating piston down at the bottom there. So what we got to do here to get that guy out is put compressed air through there. So if you bought the rebuild kit, you already know what this little guy is. This thing right here. This is the adapter to refill the struts with nitrogen through the bottom check valve when you're done. This is meant to go into a double-sided air chuck that just slips in there. There's a little bit of a stem on the bottom of it, and you just squeeze it into the bottom and hold it there. It's kind of a bitch. I got tired of it, so I improvised and made this. I used a tap and die set. This is an M8 by 1.25 threads around the shaft of this. I'm not going to unscrew it. Little block of HDPE I had. I didn't have adapters. A little pipe nipple. And then the threads inside this guy right here were, this is a 1/8 NPT 27. So what they say in the instructions is you put compressed air in here and the floating piston will shoot out the other side. They are not joking. It will come out very, very fast. So put something on the downstream side, on the cannon side, that can catch it, or don't put anything there so it can just fly out. Because the seals, there's one seal around the piston, it'll get caught on that C-ring, or the C-clip spot right there, and then just pop out. So let me show you. That was it. That didn't take much. So now we can see down in the bottom there is your check valve. So hit it with some compressed air, run some paper towels down there on a tube. I'll show you how to do that in a second just to get everything out. And then we're ready to start reassembling. So this is how I make my highly sophisticated cleaning tool. This is just a piece of HDPE pipe, 2 feet. I guess it's 1.5 inches that I got from Lowe's. Fits in there pretty well. And just kind of haphazardly wrap this thing around here, leaving like a bit of tag off the end because you want that to get into the grooves. And then just tape it around there. Painter's tape works pretty well. This is just so you can pull it back out afterwards so it doesn't get stuck down in there, because if it does, good luck getting it out. All I have to do with compressed air in the bottom. So just like cleaning a gun barrel, just thread it on in there, twist it around a bit. Not too bad. All shiny. Okay, reassembly time. Let's get the parts out of the rebuild kit that you bought. If you hadn't, you're kind of screwed right now. Make sure you wipe off the edge here with a clean section of your rag, or get a clean rag like a smart person. So before we put the floating piston in, if you're as bad as I was at taking out this C-clip, you might have mangled the strut housing a little bit. So what you want to do, so we can avoid damaging the seal going in, is you can see around that edge there, just run a piece of sandpaper, I got a 200 grit in my hand, along that upper edge there, sideways, not up and down, and hold it like so, so that the shavings don't go into the tube. Just once or twice around, just to smooth it over, and then we're going to check with the blue rag once we're done to make sure it's not, the blue rag doesn't stick to anything, so we don't have anything that can damage that seal. Just like that. And now inspect the inside. We're looking for any little spot where the blue rag came off. It's really good to use these blue guys, these shop towels, as opposed to normal paper towels, because they will leave a little tab on the end if there's a little piece of metal sticking out. And this looks like we're... Oh, no, there's a little bit right there. There we go. These are your floating pistons. We'll need one of those. Put these down somewhere where they're going to stay clean if you are going to put them down somewhere. And then this is your upper seal assembly. There's that top stage and there's the seal. So the floating piston is going to go in first. Remember, the conical side faces up. Take a little bit of oil. There's probably some oil on this guy somewhere. Inside of the cap, just lube up that rubber ring. And this should just go in by hand right here. Just like that. So that guy's going in there. We're going to get the rod with the valving to push it down a little bit. Now we only want to push this piston down to somewhere in here so that we can bleed the valving up and down, and then we'll worry about setting the rod height once we're done with that. There we go. Just like that. So now we're fighting that check valve in the bottom here. So in order to get it down, in order to get the floating piston down a little bit more, put that Allen key back in there, push down to open the valve. You hear it. Right about there for now. And I'll pull this guy back out. Come on, you. There we go. Now we want to put a little bit of our fluid in there. But we want to put just a little bit of fluid in here at first, pretty much just to submerge the valving, because we're going to put like an inch of fluid in there, and then run the valving in, and then fill it up a little bit more. Kind of pour this like a beer so that you don't get air bubbles in there. There we go. I mean, if you do get some air bubbles, not a huge deal. That's what bleeding the valving is for. Okay. So I've got it filled right about there. Piston's right about there. Just make sure you're clean. I've already slid the new upper seal and stage on here. This is kind of just like a dust guard for when I'm working this thing up and down. It's one more thing to catch dust before it falls down in there, just in case anything came off my gloves. What I would recommend doing now is taking that nut that was on the top here and thread it on upside down. We're going to use this as a little bit of a handle so our fingers don't get super tired working this thing up and down. So now basically we just want to push with as little force as it takes to work the valve through the oil. Now your piston will start pushing down when you do this. It'll bottom out eventually, somewhere. See, I can push down and it kind of bounces back up, so it's pushing, the pressure that's in there is still pushing back on it. So now we want to do, you can put more fluid in there if you want. Actually, I'm going to do that, because now we want to work the valve up and down, like seriously 20-30 times. This will take a minute, just be patient. We're trying to get all the air bubbles through the valving and out. And you're going to hear some trickling noises when you do this. Basically, you want to keep working this up and down until you don't hear any sounds at all, completely silent. Let's put a little more oil in here. And if you're going to add more oil like this, I would not fill it up more than maybe 2 inches from the top or so, because when we're working this valve up and down, if you pull too hard going up, you're going to suction that floating piston and pull the piston up, and that's a bit too fast. So if you do that and you filled it up all the way, you're going to spill fork oil everywhere. So the goal when we're pulling it up is to do it slow enough that that floating piston doesn't move. And the way you can tell it's not moving is while you're pulling up, your fluid level should not be coming up also. If it is, just slow down a little bit. But you'll see just how slow. And then when you're pulling this thing up, there is that little plastic piece sitting on top of the valving. I like to stop right when I see that thing, but before it comes out of the fork oil. You might see some little air bubbles pop out while you're doing this. That's good. So now that we're getting to the top here, you can see there's that little plastic piece, I don't know what it's called, but it's still in the oil, going down. Let's see if we can catch any air bubbles coming up here. Oh, there's some tiny ones. But just, if you only do this 5 or 6 times and you think you've got it, keep going, because you don't want to come back in here once you get this thing back on the car and all of a sudden you got a bouncy ride. Because one of the ways you get bounce out of these things is if air gets into the fork oil chamber, causes cavitation, and you get mostly a lot of low speed bounces coming up to traffic lights, stop signs, that kind of thing. coming out there. See on that side? You can do a few strokes and nothing will happen, then all of a sudden one of those comes out. That's why you just want to keep doing it. Also, if you're sweating as much as I am, make sure you don't drip in there. Also, if you haven't already, it's very helpful to have the damper set to wide open, the lowest setting for this. Otherwise, you'll be having to move this rod significantly slow. It'll be much more of a pain to do. Oh yeah, there's a good bunch of bubbles. See that right there? We don't want that. I like to go at least a good 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 without hearing any sounds, seeing any air bubbles before I consider it done and bled. Oh, nope, there's a big bubble. Look at that. Towards the end, I'll start increasing the rate at which I push down, just to try and force any air that's in there to come out the top. If you notice a bunch of tiny bubbles that are just sitting kind of in the top of the shock fluid column, then don't pull the valving up to the top to run into them. You want to just keep going just right below them, because they'll eventually work their way to the top, and then you can take a pick and just pop them. And these will be very tiny, like a 0.5 millimeter in diameter bubbles. But if you're not seeing big bubbles and still hearing tiny little popping and flow noises like that, then you've got a micro bubble in there somewhere, and you really want to work that out. So I pulled off this cap just to show you how to get it on there, the upper seal. Also want to get, this is that little plastic piece I was talking about that was sitting on top of the valving with these little grooves facing down. I just cleaned off a pick very well and fished it out, because this thing will help you get the last little bit of air out when we're putting this seal back in. And we want this thing to be kind of sitting up against the bottom of this top seal here, just like that. With a little bit of oil on the back of this plastic piece, it'll just stay there. So put that guy on here. It might fall down, we may have to fish it out again, it's okay. And then put the top seal down and just stick that bottom piece up there. Now, getting it down onto the rod can be a little bit tricky. And what I've found easiest is to take that top nut again and turn it on upside down just a little bit. And we're going to take these straight vice grips and just use that like so, oops, to pry that down over the smooth part of the rod. And so now I'm going to fish out that little plastic stage there again. Don't poke yourself in the eye. If you go to fish this out also, remember, don't let it come above the top of the oil, otherwise there's a good chance you're going to pull air down in there and have to do this whole bleeding process over again. Okay, I can see it. There we go. Stay there. Unlike that. Damn it. Okay. So now we want to set the rod height. And what we're going to do, remember we did that measurement from the top of this lip here to the top of the rod threads, and that was 40 millimeters. Now what we want to do is get this stage on here, just make sure it's like hand tight threaded on, don't torque it at all. And we want to measure the height from the bottom of that lip to the bottom of the seal itself, the bottom of the metal seal. The reason why we're doing this is because we're going to fill the fluid up to the very top here, and then when we go to seal this thing in, we'll push the seal down, it'll push that fluid down a little bit. So whatever we set the floating piston to, when we push that seal in, the whole fluid column will push the floating seal down, or the floating piston down. So when we set this floating piston height in a second here, we want it to be 40 millimeters exposed plus whatever this height is here. So we have that is 20 millimeters. So I'm going to set this to 60. And that is going to be our target height. Okay. Now to do this, you may have to take it out of the vise like I'm about to, because we can set the height before filling all the oil in there. And we're taking it off so that we can open up that valve in the bottom. Okay, so remember, from top of the lip to top of the rod, we want to be 60 millimeters, 6 centimeters. There we are. Perfect. Put that back in. So now, want to get a little bit of oil in your glove, lube up those seals, and also make sure there's no specks of anything on them. Also want to make sure that little plastic piece is in there because that'll help us disperse any last air bubbles. I'm going to pull this stage up as far as it'll go before it gets off the smooth part of the rod onto the threads. And then when you pour this oil in here, remember, you don't want it to just pour right in there and possibly make a hydraulic jump and possibly cause bubbles. You want this to kind of float or slide down the side of the strut body. Just take your time with it. We're going to fill this all the way to the top and just get a tiny little drop overflowing just to be safe. This is also your last chance to check for air bubbles. If you got a light like this that can shine a reflection, it makes these tiny little air bubbles very, very easy to see. I got one floating around here. I can show you what I mean. You see that little speck that's shining? Right. There it is. We gotta pop that guy. So I found it very helpful to take a pick, dry the end of the pick, and pop it. I got a few more in there that you didn't see. Okay. Fill this the rest of the way. There we go. All the way to the top. Get this guy as level as you can, straight up and down. It's not a huge deal because of that little plastic piece. And now, it might be helpful to thread this guy back on just to have a handle to hold on to, because we're going to slide this upper seal and stage down now. There we go. This is going to make a mess. You're going to pour a bunch of fluid out. So if you don't have an area where you can drip fluid all over the place, just wrap a towel around the bottom like this to catch it. Here we go. Very slowly, you want to let the oil work its way out of those grooves. There we go. Oop. And now watch, when I push this down, the whole rod will move with it. Just like that. And you see how it's pushing itself back up a little bit? That's because we're fighting the air in the bottom of the strut now. Not a big deal. We can let that out in a little bit. And besides, we're going to fill it with nitrogen eventually anyway. And the whole reason we're using nitrogen is just because the molecule is larger, so it doesn't leak through seals as easily. And now thread this guy off. Check your gloves, make sure they're clean, because we want to press this top stage down just a little bit to make room for the C-clip to fit back in its groove. So it's time to put the C-clip back in. What I recommend doing with this is taking a grinder to kind of slope the edges a little bit to make it easier to take out next time. The edges of the C-clip are straight, and that's part of the reason why I have an issue fiddling the pick around it to get it out, and that causes you to mangle the strut body a little bit. So you see all I did there was make some grooves on the outside like that, so I can fit a pick under there more easily and pry it out later. There we go. Make sure there's no dirt or anything on the threads in here. Thread that down. Use your adapter. Hand tight. And then quick little ugga dugga from the impact. I have it set on 3. Just like that. So now what's left is to refill this guy with nitrogen. You're going to do that through the bottom here. So you set your nitrogen pressure. I'm going to set this to 220 psi. I asked Raceworks what the upper limit was, and they said that 220 is the upper safe limit. They wouldn't tell me what it was set to stock, but just based on when I let the air out, it doesn't seem like it was over 100. More nitrogen pressure is going to push up on the car a bit more and let you run a lower preload, so you hopefully get a little bit softer of a feel. But it's something you have to play around with for your car. And what you're going to do is when you get your nitrogen pressure set on the tank, you're going to take this guy and hold it and just jam it in there. You got to hold it with force. There's nothing keeping this in. If it's not perfectly flat, you'll leak air out the sides. And the rod on the end here should rise. So what I like to do, jam it in there, hold it as long as you can. The rod will rise. Your arms will get tired doing this. And then wait a second, rest, get a better grip on it, and then do it again and hold it until you hear nitrogen stop flowing through the adapter. You'll hear it stop eventually. It'll take a few seconds longer than you think. But that's the way that you can make sure you get the nitrogen inside actually set and equilibrated to whatever you have it set to on the nitrogen tank itself. Once you're done, remember you got to put that rubber plug back in there and then screw in the screw-in seal on top of that with the 3mm Allen key. Well, it's been 2 weeks and Raceworks still hasn't sent me any replacement bump stops, so I just got these neoprene spacers from Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. They're the same height and they're going to be a little bit stiffer anyway, probably won't fall apart as easily. Just got to drill out the hole in the middle a little bit. It says it's a 1/2 inch wide, but I'm going to drill out a bit more with a 1/2 inch drill bit just to make it fit over the rod better. The rod is closer to 5/8 inch thick, so if you happen to have a drill bit that big, then I'd go for that. So you just got to push this guy onto the end of the rod here, push the spacer, or makeshift bump stop. I'm just closing the jaws of the clamp here enough so that I can rest this on there and still have enough room for the rod to push through it, because it's going to be a bitch. So what we want to do is get grease on those two collars that you see in between them, and then on top of the inner collar and on the lip of the rubber seal right here. Like so. So now just slide this on in there. There we go. Thread on your top nut. This is that 17 mil. And again, no torque specs on these, so it's just kind of a quick blast kind of thing. Like so. Get your damper rod, thread that on in there. Oops. And then it's a 21 millimeter, just hand tight. Do not tighten that down with the impact or you'll break it. All right, before reassembly, clean up these threads, wire brush, compressed air, whatever you gotta do, clean them up. Same thing on the inside of the lower strut mount. And I would highly recommend using a little bit of anti-seize in there or a lot of bit of anti-seize in there, just so that these things don't seize up like you saw happen earlier in the video. So there's a bearing up in this top piece here. You just want to make sure there's not a bunch of dust and dirt and crap in there. This is all grease on the bottom side. Came with that from Raceworks, and it was in pretty good shape. I brushed the top off a little bit, but don't like really get at it with the bristle brush, or you can work some of that stuff in there. damp rag, paper towel, just like that. And you want to make sure there's this little spacer piece that goes in the bottom. Make sure that thread's on there first. If there's any play, like if it's loose, you're missing that piece. Same thing for the top here. There's a piece in the bottom, a little spacer that needs to be there. And the top nut is itself a spacer. So make sure the collar that's on there goes down, otherwise that'll move around. And you want to hand thread this all the way down just so you don't damage the spherical bearing by blasting it in from the top. And then you are a 22, I want to say. Sure are. Impact to 3, few ugga duggas. There we go.